At the age of 46, Neil collided with the fragility of his own existence. It was a revelation buried deep within the grey matter of his skull, a biological error that would force a confrontation between the preservation of the body and the survival of the self. While such a diagnosis is objectively catastrophic, the timing of fate is often ironic. Sometimes the delivery of bad news is the only thing that prevents the worst news. Yet the distinction is rarely clear in the moment. The unravelling began in the most poetic of settings, a university lecture hall at New York University. Neil, a tenured professor of philosophy, stood before his students, dissecting the intricate architecture of human suffering for his course: pessimism, despair, and hope. In the middle of articulating a thought on the inevitability of decay, his own biology provided a visceral demonstration. His head snapped back, pulled by invisible marionette strings. His eyes rolled into the void of his skull, and his jaw slackened in a grotesque mimicry of awe before he collapsed. The darkness that overtook him was not philosophical, but neurological. The paradoxical good news was that this electrical storm did not kill him. Instead, it served as a violently loud alarm bell, revealing an arteriovenous malformation, AVM, a chaotic tangle of arteries and veins hidden within his brain. At the hospital, the immediate crisis was averted. Surgeons successfully embolized the hemorrhage, blocking the abnormal vessels to prevent the oxygenated blood from bypassing the brain tissue. It was a temporary victory, a finger in the dike. The structural flaw remained, ticking like a bomb. The malformation was accessible, nestled near the surface of the skull, meaning it could be fully excised. However, nature is rarely so generous without demanding a price. The lesion was situated in the frontal lobe, the evolutionary crown jewel of the human brain. This is the seat of executive function, the forge of abstract thought, language processing, and complex problem solving. To cut away the malformation was to risk cutting away the essential machinery that allowed Neil to be Neil. The medical consensus was grimly specific. The surgery would likely permanently blunt his capacity for abstract reasoning. He would lose the ability to synthesize theoretical concepts, to dance with high-level logic, and to engage with the very questions that defined his existence. Here lay the existential trap. Neil could refuse the surgery, preserving his mind, but living under the sword of Damocles, with a 60% probability that a subsequent hemorrhage would kill him outright. Or he could undergo the procedure, reducing the risk of death to a mere 10%, but almost certainly accepting a kind of cognitive lobotomy. He would survive, yes, but the philosopher would die. The entity that remained might breathe and eat, but it would no longer be capable of the deep, piercing inquiry that was the cornerstone of his identity. Neil's devotion to philosophy was not merely a career. It was a survival mechanism forged in the fires of childhood trauma. His journey into the abyss began at 8 years old, witnessing the slow, agonizing decay of his older brother to acute myeloid leukemia. That loss, stark and irrevocable, was quickly followed by the disintegration of his parents' marriage, a union that, like a fair-weather ship, capsized at the first sign of a storm. Left as an only child in the care of a transient hotel consultant father, Neil became a nomad of the soul. The isolation of constant travel and the exposure to a kaleidoscope of global suffering drove him inward. He didn't choose philosophy. Philosophy claimed him. Throughout his adolescence and into adulthood, Neil found resonance in the darkest corridors of human thought. He became a disciple of philosophical pessimism, finding kinship in the works of Dostoevsky, Schopenhauer, Cioran, and Zapffe. As a professional academic and author of 6 acclaimed books, his voice was unique, nihilistic, yet hauntingly beautiful. a literary style that dissected alienation and absurdity with surgical precision. He did not traffic in bleakness for the sake of being edgy. He was simply, ruthlessly honest. His work argued that truth is often terrifying, and to look away is a form of cowardice. Now, reality was calling his bluff. The decision paralyzed him. It was a choice between a likely biological death and a certain ontological death. To the outside world, the choice seemed trivial. Survival is the biological imperative. But for Neil, the equation was unbalanced. The surgery. You have to get the surgery. Is this seriously even a question? Maya, his girlfriend, implored him later, her voice laced with panic and disbelief. They sat in the heavy silence of their living room, the air thick with unsaid things. Neil stared at the floor, his mind racing through permutations of logic that he might soon be unable to comprehend. "I don't know," he murmured. "I have to think." "Think? That's your problem," Maya exploded, her fear manifesting as anger. "You intellectualize everything. You are considering letting yourself die because you might not be able to ponder the void anymore. You've spent your life asking unanswerable questions. Are you happier for it? Or would you be better off just living?" "Depends on what you mean by better off," Neil replied, his voice detached. That right there," she cried. "Why does everything have to be a thesis? Maybe life without constant analysis, without abstracting every moment into a theory, wouldn't be a curse. Maybe it would be peace. But everything is complicated," Neil countered softly, "because perception dictates reality." Maya wept, defeated by his detachment. Neil remained silent, staring into a future that looked like a blank wall. Days later, the dialectic continued, this time with George, a fellow philosopher and close friend. George was a mirror to Neil's soul. Pragmatic, distinct, and intolerant of comforting lies. "Let's look at the logic," George posited, leaning forward. "If you get the surgery and it strips you of your capacity to reason, to seek truth, to be you, wouldn't you be dead anyway? How can you voluntarily trade the ability to understand existence for mere biological persistence? It's like returning to the cave after seeing the sun and blinding yourself on purpose. It is trading wisdom for ignorance. Is a life unexamined worth sustaining?" Neil nodded, the weight of the argument settling in his chest. It was exactly what he would have argued in a lecture. But the abstraction of the unexamined life feels very different when you are the one holding the scalpel to your own intellect. Finally, Neil's father visited. A man of stoicism and practicality, he represented the world. Neil had often critiqued the world of functional ignorance. "I've always respected your work, even if I never understood it," his father admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I've lived a life without metaphysical angst. I don't ask why we are here, and I've been fine. Ignorance is bliss, as they say." Neil looked at his father, really seeing him, perhaps for the last time through his current lens. "However," his father added, locking eyes with his son, "there are things in my life I would sacrifice that bliss for, things I wouldn't trade for safety. You have to ask yourself, is philosophy your hobby or is it your soul? Is the risk of losing it worse than the risk of losing everything?" For a week, Neil existed in a superposition of choices, oscillating between the will to live and the will to be. The pendulum swung back and forth, fear of death, fear of emptiness, fear of death, fear of emptiness. The following Monday, the timeline collapsed into a single moment. Neil sat in the neurologist's office, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling his nose. The doctor, a mechanic of the flesh, looked at him with expectant eyes. "So," the doctor asked, hovering a pen over the chart, Have we decided? Are we moving forward with the surgery? Neil looked up. The room seemed to sharpen, the details of the world coming into hyper-focus. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the air of a reality he was about to irrevocably alter. Yes, Neil said, his voice steady and resolute. I've decided.